Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's meeting of the TPO Board. Today is Tuesday, September 14th. And before we begin, we should all stand for just a moment and give the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are having a hybrid meeting this morning with some members participating remotely and others here in the room to provide us with a quorum. So at this time, I'm going to ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Commissioner Kemp?
Here.
Commissioner Overman?
Here.
Commissioner Myers?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Mayor Ross?
Here.
Gina Evans?
Here.
Hart Board Member Melanie Williams?
Here.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Here.
Charles Klug?
Here.
Bob Frey?
Here.
Derek Dowdy?
Here.
Commissioner Kilton?
Here.
Councilman Maniscalco? Councilman Citro?
Here.
Councilman Dingfelder?
Here.
Board Member Jessica Vaughn?
Here.
And that completes roll call.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we have a motion for approval of the minutes of our August 11th meeting? We have a motion by
Second.
Commissioner Kemp, seconded by Commissioner Myers and Overman, I believe. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on now to public comment. I believe that Secretary Gwynn may be on the line to provide some information this morning during this public comment section of our agenda.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Secretary Gwynn. Thank you for joining us.
Yep, no, I'm very excited to be here today. I'm glad to report that yesterday we got, I think, some really good news for the region. The good news was a result of a lot of work by a lot of people over the last probably at least 4 to 5 years. But Governor DeSantis was in town yesterday and announced some significant funding that's coming to Tampa Bay region for our some of our projects, and I wanted today to go over some of it with you. Also because next month we'll be coming to you for a TIP amendment or a few TIP amendments to help us to be able to access and program this money to be used this fiscal year and next fiscal year. To give you some of the details here, first, the biggest announcement was that the West Shore Interchange project, which was or is currently funded in 26, is being moved in to be let to a contractor in the summer of 2023, which means we'll be advertising for a contract in about a year, and hopefully we'll have a contractor underway within 2 years awarded a contract. That's a huge advancement. It's going to be overall up to $1.2 billion over a 6 or 7 year period. But then we also got some additional news. Because of the work done to advance the downtown interchange project and the operational improvements that were arrived at through the SEIS, the governor announced that he's going to provide us the $150 million to build that project, and actually that's in this fiscal year. So that project will be under contract by June of 2022. That's a major advancement for our region. We also were given money to do a number of other, what we call early works projects that are going to start later this year that will help to create additional capacity, not necessarily by building more roadway lanes, but by adding technology solutions along a number of our corridors in the area of the West Shore Interchange and roads that may take traffic during construction. They include putting in integrated corridor management technology along US 41, from Kennedy to Bears on Hillsborough Avenue, from Veterans to I-275, as well as along Nebraska. We are also going to be advancing some pedestrian improvement projects along Nebraska from Kennedy to Bush, along Dale Mabry from Mango to Pearl, and we'll also be advancing the resurfacing of State Road 60 from Turkey Creek to the County Line Road. This is great news for our region. And I can tell you, in talking to the folks, we got more than our fair share, if you would, of the stimulus funds. And what I heard from the Senate President and the Speaker of the House was that the fact that we spoke as a region, the fact that we had a unified voice on the West Shore interchange and the downtown interchange went a long way to increasing our chances. The fact that we have the Senate President from Pasco County and we have the Speaker from Pinellas County, and they pushed forward 2 high-profile Hillsborough County projects shows that we're speaking as a region. I think it also gives us hope that if we continue to speak as a region, if we partner with the 3 different counties in our main part of our region, that if we look at other big projects, things we're looking at like commuter rail, things we're looking at with other modes, if we come together as a region, I think we'll have some really good opportunities to advance major projects. So I wanted to make those announcements today. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have, and then also know that we'll be working really hard this month to get the TIP amendments ready to be presented to you next month.
All right, well, that's excellent. Thank you for joining us this morning with this very important update. I know that these are projects in many cases that people in this room and online have been working on in one form or another for many years. So there's a lot of sweat equity involved in a lot of it. I want to just go around the room and see if there are any comments or questions from board members. I don't see any online. Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you. Because we are very familiar with most of the projects that were out there, I don't have many questions, but there were a couple of projects that were noted by Secretary Gwynn that I wasn't expecting, and I wasn't as, I'm not familiar with. So you did say, can you just speak to Florida Avenue between Kennedy and Bears? What you were referring to as the change in the traffic, I guess, system.
Yes, so what we're doing is, and this is part of our program we're looking at to more actively manage traffic during construction for a major project like the West Shore Interchange. We'll be putting in advanced technology along these corridors that includes video, that includes other types of data collection, and the ability to actively manage the signals along corridors that are going to be carrying more traffic. And so instead of just having the time of day plans or the day of week plans that we normally run and we try to make them match the normal conditions, we'll be able to actively change those conditions on a real-time basis, similar to what we do on the interstates sometimes with our signs and with our technology. But this will allow us to better manage traffic during the construction period.
Yeah.
That's very interesting information, and I know we've gotten what we've called smart systems and traffic technology at many intersections around the county over the years, and I've always wondered when we're going to get something that actually can look at real time, because I so often see something living near Florida and Hillsborough Avenue. I, for instance, will see that Hillsborough Avenue is, believe it or not, absolutely open, and yet the streets that are approaching it are unable to move because the traffic signals will literally, I mean, I time them 3 minutes long is the stop. So will this address that? When you said video and data collection in real time, does that mean if a road is absolutely open and there's all, or relatively speaking so, that the other perpendicular lane would be able to move traffic through at an intersection? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so it could, and that's more of the adaptive signal control that we have started to implement in certain places throughout the district. But one of the drawbacks, if you would, or impediments, is that it does require a lot of data collection in real time. And so this will allow us to put a lot of that out there. So you're right, if you're sitting at the red light and there's nobody on the main street, it would have the opportunity to turn it green for a short period of time to let people off the road without causing problems on the main corridor. So it does have the ability to make decisions like that in real time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Overman?
Thank you. And as it relates to that particular issue, how does that coordinate with the system that the city of Tampa is working in, since much of what you described is actually within the city of Tampa? Is that data shared or is it coordinated? How does that work?
Yes, we'll be coordinating closely with the city of Tampa. So as you probably know, on the state road system, we typically work with the local maintaining agency that handles the day-to-day operations of the signals and also the maintenance of the signals. We reimburse them to maintain them. What these allow us to do is also allow us from our traffic management center on critical corridors to be able to manage them ourselves using a real-time technology. So we'll be coordinating very closely with the city. They continue to build their state-of-the-art signal system for the whole city. And so this will be more or less augmenting that capability.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And I just have one question to add along the lines of what Commissioner Kemp was asking about. It would seem to me that as the Howard Franklin Bridge construction and the interchange there, as that all gears up, there's going to be more pressure on Gandy because Gandy is really, for at least for now, is finished and operates relatively smoothly. Is there any of this traffic technology being deployed down there in anticipation of the fact that they're going to be a place people are going to go to avoid the inconveniences of the construction on the Howard Franklin and in the West Shore interchange?
Are you speaking of as you get towards the Gandy Bridge?
I'm speaking really of Gandy and West Shore and that whole corridor right there where there have been major improvements made, but that's a major bottleneck, particularly if there's more bridge traffic coming in at peak hours.
Yeah, we can look at that. I don't believe that was on this list. I have heard that since they opened up the viaduct that traffic below had gotten a lot better. But
It has. There's no question about it.
But we'll be able to definitely keep an eye on that.
Okay. Is there anyone else? Yes, Mayor Ross.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Secretary Gwynn. I do have a question regarding the release of unexpected funds or acceleration of funds. Does this, Secretary, provide any opportunity to cascade down and free up other funds that may serve to accelerate the time?
Mayor Ross, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we need to make sure everyone wears their mask while they're speaking in the building. Thank you.
Sorry. Is there any opportunity to accelerate the Fowler Avenue projects?
So, yeah, this is really a multi-phase process we're following right now. The initial phase was this year the legislature had allocated an additional $1.6 billion to the State Transportation Trust Fund. And that money was for fiscal years 22 and 23. So we have been programming that money, and that's what we're talking about today. But what happens is you're right. Some of those projects that were moved in, and this is all throughout the state. I'm only talking right now about the projects in Hillsborough County. But those projects that are being moved into 22 and 23, some of them were programmed in 24, 25, and 26. And so the next step is to look at backfilling those years where we freed up revenue to be able to advance those. You know, the other thing we're not even talking about yet is one, if a federal stimulus bill is passed, there would be a significant amount of money that would come to Florida that we could use to advance important projects like Fowler. but also the revenue estimating conference, every time they've met since the beginning of the pandemic, have increased their estimates of gas tax revenues and other revenues that come to the State Transportation Trust Fund. So we continue to see more revenues being projected than we had when we went through the process at the beginning of the pandemic of basically paring a lot of projects out and cutting back the work program. So my feeling is that over the next few months, we'll also see more projects given the opportunity to move further in the work program.
Thank you. And Councilman Dingfelder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, I'm sure that over the next 6 months or so, as this process evolves, we'll have a lot more questions. But for today, I just wanted to say thank you. I know how hard you and your staff and other leaders in the community, including folks in this room, have been working for to get this money, to get these projects going, and to get them moving fast. And I just wanted to say thank you for that. And let's just enjoy the moment today, and then, this board's never short of questions, and we'll have plenty more down the road. But congratulations and thank you today.
Councilman Dingfelder, that's a very apt way to end this discussion, and I think we all agree with your sentiments that this is definitely a day to rejoice. So with that, thank you, Secretary Gwynn, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. And of course, we will talk more about this then. We're going to move on now to any other public comment. I don't think we have anyone scheduled to speak today, but let me confirm that with the clerk.
We do not have anybody signed up for public comment today.
All right. Well, then we're going to move on to committee reports. And I believe that Bill Roberts, our CAC chair, is with us this morning.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee members board members for having me this morning. I also want to echo Councilman Dingfelder's comments that this is a tremendous step forward for transportation, not just in our county, but in our region. And I assure you the CAC will look forward to reviewing and seeing those TIP amendments as quickly as he can bring them forward. Your CAC met on September the 1st. We made two recommendations to the board, which I believe are on your agenda today. One, in fact, is a TIP amendment for the Tampa Multimodal Network and Safety Improvements. The second is the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan Performance Targets. Those are recommended favorably to you today. The CAC also heard status reports on the county's Complete Streets Guidebook, report on the Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan Mobility section, excuse me, and a Heart Transit-Oriented Development Pilot Project report. And then I would like to thank Commissioner Smith for the appointment to our committee that is on your agenda today. Mr. Chairman and members, that concludes my report. I'd be happy to take any questions if you have some.
Thank you, Bill, as always. And let me just look around the room. I don't see any hands raised with questions, so we appreciate your report. And I'm now going to move on to Davita Franklin, and then Ms. Alden.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Here is your summary of committee reports and public comments. This summary does include notes that are not in your packet from the September 8th Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee meeting and the September 13th Technical Advisory Committee meeting. So pertaining to the action items in today's agenda, the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan targets, that was approved by the Citizens Advisory Committee, as you just heard, the Technical Advisory Committee, and the Transportation Disadvantage Coordinating Board. The Technical Advisory Committee recognized that the targets needed to be reasonable, even though the acceptable number of expected injuries continued to move downward. There was also some confusion on the reliability target changing and if the increase meant a benefit to safety or not. The Transportation Improvement Plan amendment for the West Riverwalk extension was approved by the Technical Advisory Committee and the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. The Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee gave input on the current conditions along Columbus Drive, received clarification about the proposed path types, and commented on the allowance of micro-mobility devices on different paths and equity concerns with some devices. The Technical Advisory Committee asked the City of Tampa about the project's effect on capacity. City staff said they're considering capacity and safety of all modes, not just vehicular. The city also said that although the project is still in development with no specific recommendations yet, they will include the possibility of lane repurposing, lane narrowing, speed management, and other treatments. Other approvals, the Transportation Disadvantage Coordinating Board formed a subcommittee on the proposed transportation tax, and they approved the coordination contract with ACTS. Other status updates, the Technical Advisory Committee and Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee heard status reports on the Hillsborough Complete Streets Guide. The Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee requested clarification on which roads or sections the guide could be applied to based on commercial or residential context, and whether it represented local standards or national best practices, which it represented national best practices. The Federal Department of Transportation, or FDOT, staff suggested bringing this item to the Community Traffic Safety Team. The Technical Advisory Committee, they asked whether the topologies would be woven into land use maps in the comprehensive plan. They confirmed that the context classifications will be in the comprehensive plan, but the Complete Streets Guide is considered the next step in implementation. Also, the Health Department's representative appreciated how placemaking was integrated into the guide, recognizing its ability to improve the health of the community. And they discussed how complete street guidelines are integrated with limited access highways. The response was that where limited access highways touch down onto the street network, they'll pay special attention to drivers that are entering a different place in consideration of how to help at those transition points. Could be added to the guide. Part Transit-Oriented Development Pilot Project. The Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee heard a status update on that and noted that the need for additional crossings in the area would be helpful, and asked whether right-of-way is being taken for expanded sidewalks, and it is. Members also noted that the rent numbers used in the study may have substantially increased, and they noted the need for accessory dwelling units and the reduction of parking requirements. The Technical Advisory Committee also heard the update, and the project was well received by the committee for being in a prime location, and HART staff also confirmed with Justin Willits will be the point of contact for the study. For the Park Speed Zone pilot study, the Technical Advisory Committee confirmed that county and city park staff and other partners were directly involved on the stakeholder team, weighing in on prioritization and existing conditions. They also supported the name change to the Safe Access to Parks study. The Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan Mobility section was presented to, as you heard before, the Citizens Advisory Committee, but also the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Livable Roadways Committee. The Heights Mobility Study Next Steps project, that project was presented to the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Transportation Disadvantage Coordinating Board, and the Livable Roadways Committee. And finally, for these updates, the Transportation Disadvantage Coordinating Board also heard status updates on the Sunshine Line and the FTA 5310 grant program and the Storm Evacuation Forest and Shelter in Place Scenarios study. So that's the completion of your update for committee reports. And now on to a summary of public comments. So on social media on Facebook on August 3rd, Chris Vela, in response to the West Riverwalk Extension TIP Amendment, said, "I'd rather the TIP Amendment be the removal of current and planned interstate projects, then work on a racial impact statement as a vetting tool for FDOT's projects and yours." On Twitter, on August 23rd, the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority, or THEA, in response to a post highlighting the Selman extension, said, "Thanks for sharing." And we did receive a few emails on August 21st. Axel Clawberg, in response to a retweet about the proposed, oh, I'm sorry, this is still Twitter. In response to a retweet about proposed Amtrak routes through the state of Florida, he said, "Love this, Hillsborough MPO. Let's start planning on how to improve the Tampa train station for connections to the airport with incoming Amtrak and high-speed rail. Maybe a total redesign of that area with shops and transportation hub." And then also on Twitter, Rock King, in response to the Resilient Tampa Bay video featuring Beth Alden, said, 30% roads and transit system down. It can happen. Galveston, New Orleans, East Coast predictors of our potential disaster. Well done, succinct and prophetic. More of the same on commercial TV during prime time, during an injury break football game. And then on August 16th, T. Ralph, in response to a retweet of the Tampa Bay Business Journal article on monetary costs of the Tampa Bay commuters, because the Tampa Bay commuters will endure, that he said, "Why doesn't it take into account those costs? It should." We did receive a couple of emails in support of the West Riverwalk TIP amendment, and that concludes my report. Ms. Alden will give a quick report on the policy committee meeting that just occurred. Thank you.
Ms. Alden, before we go on, are there any questions for Ms. Franklin? She gave a very comprehensive report this morning. We appreciate it. I don't see anyone with their hand up, so Ms. Alden, you can go ahead and continue, but Ms. Franklin, thank you.
Thank you so much. The policy committee this morning held a workshop on rail and bus rapid transit projects in our county and their current status. There is a detailed slide presentation that is available in the policy committee agenda packet. The discussion this morning, was a great discussion by the board members who were able to attend, talked about the importance of looking at how these corridors support our future growth as our county continues to grow very rapidly, and to identify and prioritize our best opportunities, the most feasible projects to move forward, the most cost-effective, the ones that would have the most benefit in reducing congestion and improving mobility. Lastly, the way that those corridors connect with each other and come together and allow for seamless transfers is identified as something that we need to be paying attention to in the near term. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and seeing no further comment, we're going to move on to our consent agenda. We have two items this morning on the consent agenda: committee appointments and bylaws amendment regarding quorums at some of our subcommittees. Can we have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Commissioner Overman, seconded by Councilman Citro. Can we please have a roll call vote on the consent agenda?
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Mayor Ross?
Yes.
Gina Evans?
Yes.
Hart Board Member Melanie Williams?
Yes.
Charles Klug?
Yes.
Bob Frey?
Yes.
Derek Doughty?
Yes.
Commissioner Kilton?
Yes.
Councilman Citro?
Yes.
Councilman Dingfelder?
Yes.
Board Member Jessica Vaughn?
Yes.
And the motion passes 15-0.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to our action items. Our first is a TIP amendment for Tampa's West Riverwalk extension. Ms. Rahman, good morning.
Good morning, committee members. I'll just try to share my screen here. Are you able to see my screen now?
We are, yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good morning, all. This is Vishaka Shivaraman, TPO staff for the records. And today I'm going to be presenting to you the TIP amendment for FY 2021-22 through 25-26. And this is for the West River Build District multimodal improvements. And you have probably heard a lot of comments about this. Just to give you a quick overview, this is a set of 6 amendments that was requested by the Florida DOT, and it will add construction funds to the year 2022. As you had heard in the comments, this will help to complete the 12 miles of multimodal transportation improvements, and it will help to create a network which will support the City of Tampa's ongoing redevelopment plan, which is already existing in the West River District. This funding was received as a grant for $24 million from the US DOT for a build grant, which is better utilizing investments to leverage development. This was announced back in 2020, and the money will be disbursed after this amendment. In addition to the $24 million grant, there is a 20% local match, which is provided for the City of Tampa, accounting to a total of $30 million. I would just like to highlight to you the project location for those who are not very familiar with this area. If you notice in the map on the right, which will show that this is a phased project, it has 6 different phases, and each phase will help to complete different sections of the Riverwalk as given in the map. The various roads are Columbus Drive, Ridgewood Park, Rome Avenue, Platt Street, which are some of the main corridors connecting the Riverwalk. I would just like to highlight to you some of the benefits that this Riverwalk this multimodal improvements will provide. First of all, it'll help for the safety and mobility of this area. By meaning so, it'll help to complete the remaining gaps of the 12-mile pathway. And some of this is already in the works by the City of Tampa. At the same time, this will help to add crossings at some of the major roadways. This will also help to provide safe bike walk connections, and some of the pathways are separated from the vehicular traffic. So it provides a safe path for residents and commuters in downtown Tampa and connect the neighborhoods in this area. It will also help to increase the mobility and the accessibility. As part of the City of Tampa's plan to complete a comprehensive network of sidewalks, side paths, and bike lanes, this will add to that. This trail will help to add to that goal. In addition, this also helps to increase the economic growth and resiliency. As part of the grant request, one of the main ideas was to increase the investment in the opportunity zones in the downtown area. So this trail will help to connect to the jobs, residences, and the business district in this area. Thereby, it will help to provide long-term sustainable transportation options, including bike, walk, and other modes, which will help to increase the health, improve the overall quality of life, and reduce the traffic congestions, and help to save the carbon emissions. The design is such that it will help the seawall resiliency and mitigate stormwater runoff to the living shorelines. So this project is very beneficial for increasing the economic growth and overall resiliency of this area. This is just a quick, this slide will help you to understand where the money is distributed. I know it's a little hard to see in the slides, but this is our typical amendment page, which shows how the money has been distributed. You can see in the slide that it shows the amendment number, the date, which is today, that if it will be approved. It will show the project number. It also shows where the funds are distributed year by year. And as I had mentioned before, this goes into year FY 2022. It's a combination of TIGR, which is Tiger Grants, and LF, which is local funds. This is for the pay amendments 1 and 2. This is for amendment 3 and 4, which is the 3rd and 4th phases. And these are for the amendment 5 and 6, which is the 5th and 6th phases. So in total, all these amendments together will add to $30 million. At this time, I would like to move on to explain to you the public involvement and some of the next steps that the city will be initiating. This is a City of Tampa project, and all these will be coordinated by the City of Tampa. I do have a representative today who also from the city of Tampa, and they can answer any question if you have. But just to give you a quick update, since the award was granted in 2020, city has gone to the West River District CRA. They have gone to the Interlocal Planning Board, Hillsborough River Interlocal Planning Board, Friends of the Riverwalk, and the upcoming presentations at the TPO board today, which will also be part of their public involvement process. The next steps will be to complete the FHWA grant agreement, the budget narrative, program the local match funds, get the NEPA clearance, get a contract package. This project will be built as a design build contract, which means it'll help to expedite the process and combine the design and the construction into one contract. So it'll help to complete it and reduce the time and the amount. This will also, and the further steps will be to execute the grant and proceed into construction. I would also like to highlight, apart from the City of Tampa's initiative, the Hillsborough TPO is also going forward with our public outreach. It was requested a couple of months back at our CAC and by the board that we should be promoting the amendments and helping the public to understand more about this process. So in response to that, we did create, this was our pilot project. This tip amendment will be the pilot where we are showcasing the public outreach process. As part of this, we did create road signs as shown in the slide in the yellow color. These are standard signs which we posted at 2 locations along the Riverwalk, one at Columbus and Rome and one at Main Street and North Boulevard. This was posted on 8/31 and it has information to log into the meeting and also to the contact for the project. We also created a Twitter post blast, and that was the responses you heard from Davida. We also had a newsletter sent out, and we had an individual web page design for this, where people could send in their comments and get involved with the project in additional. And all this was accomplished on 8/31, which is 14 days notice time before the TPO board meeting. I do wanted to appreciate our staff who created this, helped to put this together, and we did have a lot of response in support of the project. With that, if you don't have any questions, I would request you to approve the amendment for the 2021-22.
Second. We have a motion by Commissioner Overman, seconded by Councilman Citro. Let me just say that I think this is just a transformative project for the city of Tampa. It is going to connect assets that are in desperate need of connection and bring together probably 25 years worth of work by people across probably 3 or 4 mayoral administrations and many city councils that contributed to making this happen. It's really going to transform the urban core. Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you. I would agree. It's just very exciting for us to have this. And when you see, I mean, everyone's excited when they come to town, and everyone who lives here, when you see how totally filled with everything you can imagine, our Riverwalk in terms of people on it, and I don't even know what the status of other types of scooters, but there's all kinds of use of our Riverwalk, and people are just, I think, joyous and thrilled, and it's beautiful. I do have one notice question that I was just curious about. So I know, so this is getting federal funding comes under TIP. So MPO does a hearing. Does the city of Tampa do a hearing and notice as well? I'm just curious process-wise. I was just surprised to see that.
I'm not aware of any.
I was just surprised to
Ms.
see the
Alden?
signs put out there by the MPO. I was just curious.
Councilman Dingfelder shaking his head.
Sure. So the signs and the social media post and the press release are part of the expanded public involvement that we are testing out for our TIP amendments. We talked a couple of months ago about possibly shortening the review time from 3 weeks to 2 weeks, but offsetting that by really stepping up our outreach, focusing on the specific geographic areas and communities that would be affected by the TIP amendment. So we have not officially shortened our notice period, but we are basically doing a test run of these stepped-up public outreach and information activities. So we'll report back to you next spring about what kind of success we've had. So far, it's been very positive. We've received several emails and got a bit of news coverage about this particular amendment.
I would expect nothing else, but I guess you were going to say whether there was a city council. I mean, it would seem like it would be a.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I don't think we have anything formal like that. I know the mayor and the administration do a lot of outreach in terms of sending out notices. I think at midnight last night I got something as related to what happened yesterday and that sort of thing, and so they try and keep the public informed in that regard. But on the formal side, I can only think that during our regular agendas, we have $6 million in this project that, as that money contracts are being entered into, that's when the public clearly could have input as well. But I can't think of anything else formal.
Well, the one last thing I'd say before we vote is, for people, there's a lot of people that ride their bikes on Bayshore Boulevard and connect to the Riverwalk. And that connection over the Platte Street Bridge is a bit treacherous. There is a connection, but it's a bit treacherous. This is going to be transformative. This is going to give a person the ability to ride a bike or walk or run literally all the way up the Hillsborough River, down Bayshore, with a huge continuous stretch. And it'll be a lot less cumbersome than it is now to make that transition. Is there any other conversation before we move on for the vote? All right, seeing none, all those in favor. Actually, we need a roll call vote on this, so I'm going to turn it over to the clerk. Thank you.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Mayor Ross?
Yes.
Gina Evans?
Yes.
Heart Board Member Melanie Williams?
Yes.
Charles Klug?
Yes.
Bob Frey?
Yes.
Derek Doughty?
Yes.
Commissioner Kilton?
Yes.
Commissioner Citro?
Absolutely.
Councilman Dingfelder?
Yes.
And Board Member Jessica Vaughn.
Yes.
And the motion passes 14-0 with one non-vote.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right,
Thank
we're
you.
going to move on to our next action item, which is Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan Performance Targets. Johnny Wong is here to present that item.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
All right, great, thank you. Johnny Wong, TPO staff. This morning I'm here to present our 2021 Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan Performance Targets. That's quite a mouthful, so from here on out, I'm going to abbreviate that as PTest. And in the end, I'm going to brief you on how this might impact some of our existing planning processes moving forward. So the PTest targets originate, much like the other performance measures and targets, from MAP 21 legislation. That legislation requires us to track performance and set targets for the coming calendar year. The PTest measures are the latest among a series of performance measures that we have brought to you on an annual basis over the previous 5 to 6 years. The federal reporting requirements for PTest are that we have to measure and set targets for 7 measures, which are shown on the slide. And each of these 7 measures apply to all of the transit modes that we have in the county. And because there are 4, what that means is we're responsible for tracking performance for 28 individual measures. The measures that we are required to track are fatalities, fatality rate, which is number of fatalities divided by 100,000 vehicle revenue miles, injuries, and then the injury rate, safety events rate, and then system reliability. System reliability is the average distance in between major mechanical failures for each transit mode. So while a low number of fatalities, injuries, and safety events indicates that we're doing really well, a really high number for system reliability indicates that we're doing well. So that one is kind of the opposite of this. What constitutes a safety concern is defined by the Federal Transit Administration in the PTest rule. Fatalities can include incidents like bus collisions, suicides, workplace accidents, something like if someone is killed or hurt in the mechanic shop or on Hart property would constitute a workplace accident. Also, acts of God, as in deaths that are due to natural disasters. Injuries are counted if they require a person to be transported to a medical facility and if they occur aboard a transit vehicle or at a Hart facility or station. Safety events can include things like collisions, fires, smoke, derailments, or evacuations. And system reliability is a function of things like, well, system reliability, again, is the distance traveled by a vehicle before a vehicle failure. Some of the other things that may cause reliability to decrease are failures due to power disruptions, signal failures, or otherwise all other system failures, and there could be many.
You know what, before you go on, Commissioner Overman has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Wong, for your presentation. Could you go back to the last slide for a sec, please? So under system reliability, while collisions are under fatality and safety events, system reliability, when a collision occurs, is an absolute failure. So frequently, I mean, it actually does eliminate or impact reliability. How is it that it's not there, or does that fall under other system failures? Because it is literally, when we have a crash on any of our major roads, that system then is impacted and is failing, and it doesn't seem to be in this particular illustration. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question, Commissioner. The real quick answer is that the way that these records are maintained is by the way Hart reports them. We're speaking in the theoretical here, but I believe that if there were a collision, that would be reported as a safety event, and also it might fall under the category of other system failures. Like if the bus got in a really bad collision and it stopped working, let's say that there are no injuries, but it impacted the bus's ability to operate, that would probably fall under system failures. But I would have to check with the Hart safety officer to ensure that that's how they're reporting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. So this slide will show that the timeline and the milestones that we've achieved this year are a little bit weird. This is not how we plan to be doing, it's not how we plan to be setting targets in the future. MAP 21 requires state DOTs, transit agencies, and MPOs to report performance and set targets each year. The PTest rule was published in July of 2018, so we have known that this rule was coming up for about 3 years. And the original intention of the rule was that it would become effective in July of 2019. But since that time, there have been a number of delays. The deadline for us to adopt targets has been pushed back several times due to COVID, due to transit agency data maintenance issues. Moving forward, we anticipate that we're going to be setting targets for the calendar year much earlier in the year. We're asking you to adopt targets for calendar year 2021, and it's already the middle of September, so most of the year has already passed. But in the future, we're hoping to bring this to you alongside our Vision Zero target setting process, probably in the January to February timeframe. To this date, we believe that DOT has not yet adopted PTest targets. So in future years, while we will wait for the state, or we will wait for the state to inform us about their transit safety goals, this year we're just going to go ahead and move forward, even though the state hasn't yet adopted a PTest target. There are a few reasons why we're tracking these measures and establishing targets. These are all kind of laid out in the rule, but I'd like to summarize them very briefly for you so you get an understanding of what some of the benefits are of this target setting process. The first is that the rule requires DOTs, transit agencies, and MPOs to work together. So we have to coordinate. And in the process of reviewing performance and proposing targets together, that kind of ensures that we're all on the same page about what investments might be needed to improve performance on each of these 7 measures for each mode. Second, in reviewing the data annually, that kind of ensures that we're going to be able to see if our investments are paying off. So as we start to allocate money specifically to improve transit safety, we'll have a really good idea of where our investments are paying dividends, as in what measures are able to move the needle first. And then lastly, the TPO is going to begin integrating transit safety goals into our planning processes. I'll recap this again at the end, but we're working on developing a methodology for bringing this into the TIP prioritization process. And of course, we'll consider this ahead of the next long-range transportation plan update. So the remainder of the slides of this presentation are just going to cover the 28 transit safety targets. We're going to cover them by mode. For all of the modes, we're calculating performance by a 5-year average. So we're proposing calendar year 2021 targets, and we have done this by looking at the data from 2016 through 2020. So across the previous 5 years, from 2016 through the end of 2020, injuries on the streetcar are trending down. We took the average of that 5-year period to produce a baseline, and that is what we're using as the proposed target for you all this year. So the target for streetcar injuries is to have fewer than 1.8, or I'm sorry, fewer than 2.09, and the rate to be less than 1.8 per 100,000 vehicle revenue miles. Regarding streetcar safety events, the trend is showing that it has significantly decreased since a high of 2016. I've been informed by the HART safety officer that the most common cause of safety events on the streetcar are vehicles making incorrect turns, driving on the track, hitting the streetcar at times. And that since 2016, that number has been fairly consistent between 4 and 3. The 5-year average is to have fewer than 5.2 streetcar safety events in a given year and a rate of less than 6.03. This chart summarizes or recaps our current performance for all of the targets or all of the measures, and we are using the baseline 5-year average to establish the target. Fatalities for every mode is 0, and so the fatality and fatality rate for streetcar mode as well as all the others will be 0. The injury target that we're proposing is to have fewer than 1.8. The injury rate is fewer than 2.09. The safety events target is fewer than 5.2. The safety events rate is fewer than 6.03. And according to HART's PTest plan, they're projecting that system reliability will increase by roughly 5% from 857 miles in between streetcar failures to 900. The second mode is fixed route, which are HART's passenger buses. The number of injuries on an annual basis has been relatively consistent over the previous 5-year period. These are a major issue for HART's bus fleet. As you can see, the numbers are quite high, above 100 for all years aside from 2020. In 2020, the year-end total injuries dropped significantly because service was restricted due to COVID. In the preliminary 2021 data that we've seen, it looks like injuries are trending up slightly from that number of 68. In calculating the 5-year average, the target that we're proposing to you all is to have fewer than 115 fixed route injuries at the end of the year and a rate of less than 1.49. The most common safety event experienced by HART's passenger buses is vehicles hitting the buses, either cutting them off and hard braking, which initiates a fender bender, vehicles following too closely and then rear-ending the bus as it's pulling up to a stop. HART's safety officer has told me that his short-term goal will be to publish some public service announcements, teaching folks how to safely drive in mixed traffic with buses so that those kind of situations can be avoided in the future. The 5-year average and the proposed target that we're presenting to you for safety events is to have fewer than 81.6 at the end of the calendar year and a rate of less than 1.06. Again, fatalities and fatality rate are effectively 0, so the targets will be 0. I have already stated the injury rate, safety events, and safety event rate target. System reliability is projected to increase to 19,547, up from an average of 18,616. HART Flex and HART Plus are the paratransit modes that HART maintains. Again, like all of the other modes, performance has been relatively consistent, a decline in 2020 due to restricted operation, but the 5-year average and target is to have fewer than 86.8 safety events in the current year and a rate of less than 5.8. Injuries, the 5-year average is to have, and proposed target is to have fewer than 5.2 and a rate of less than 0.35. For the paratransit mode, the system reliability is projected to increase to 10,251 miles in between failures, up from a current performance of 9,763. And then lastly, I don't have any graphics to show you because TBarta's performance, they have not really yielded any injuries or safety events that would show up in a graph. Their fatality and fatality rate target is 0. Injuries target is 0. Injury rate is 0. They had 1 safety event over the previous 5 years, and so the target is 0. The rate is 0.04, and the target is 0. System reliability here is a little weird because, as I already mentioned, it's defined as number of miles in between failures. I think that TBarta had a typo or maybe a misunderstanding by setting that target as 0. If they wanted to increase that performance, that should actually be infinity. So it doesn't exactly make sense, but we're proposing that we adopt that target because that is what the TBarta board has adopted this year. We'll touch base with them ahead of next year's target setting process and make that correction if necessary. The next steps for us are to report the PTest targets to FDOT so that FDOT can transmit them to the Federal Transit Administration, and that will allow us to have our TIP approved. We're also working at the staff level to develop a performance methodology, which will evaluate impacts on the transit safety targets for the investments that we're prioritizing in the TIP. And then in a couple of years, when we start working on the long-range transportation plan, we will probably take a much deeper dive into assessing what the impacts are of specific transit safety improvements so that we can have a really good idea of what the 20 or 25-year impact will be of allocating some funding to improve safety. And with that, the recommended action for the board this morning is to approve the calendar year 2021 transit safety targets, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
All right, are there any questions from board members at this time? I don't see any. I can't see yet if there's any from anyone who's participating virtually, so just give me 1 second here. I don't see any. Oh, excuse me. Oh, hold on. Mr. Fry?
Yes, my only question to Mr. Wong would just be just to reassure that.
Could you speak up a little bit? Oh, there you go. Thank you.
I apologize. My question for Mr. Wong would just be is that HART was involved in creating these metrics and making sure how it all works. I just want to make sure I heard that properly.
Yes, absolutely. So we got the adopted TBarta targets directly from their staff who's responsible for tracking performance measures. So we coordinated with them already. HART sent us the performance targets that the board adopted in January, I believe, or April of this year. So we initially intended on just proposing that the TPO board adopt the targets that the HART board adopted. After coordinating with the HART safety officer and making this presentation to our TD board, we went back and we found out that there were some errors in the data. So I coordinated one-on-one with the HART safety officer several times over the past month. We had to go and QA, QC the transit data. We came up with methodology together, and I'm not sure if he's on the call, but he gave support by email that he agrees with these targets. He asked to acknowledge that there is not a justification that he's privy to about the system reliability targets being increased over this year. I guess long story short is he coordinated with me, he approved these targets. He's going to make some adjustments to the methodology next year, and we will be involved in that process. So we've been working quite closely together for this report.
Great, thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
No problem. I know I gave you way more info than you asked for, but yeah, we coordinated pretty closely on this.
All right. Can we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
We have a motion from Commissioner Myers. I heard a second from Commissioner Kemp and someone else, and I'm not sure who that person was. Can we please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Mayor Ross?
Yes.
Gina Evans?
Yes.
Hart Board Member Williams?
Yes.
Charles Klug?
Yes.
Bob Frey?
Yes.
Derek Doughty?
Yes.
Commissioner Kilton?
Yes.
Councilman Citro?
Yes.
Councilman Dingfelder?
Yes.
And Board Member Vaughn?
Yes.
The motion passes 15-0.
Thank you very much. We will move on to our final action item, which is the Strategic Intermodal System Policy Plan Update and TPO Letter of Comment, and Rich Clarendon is here to present that item.
Yes, good morning. Excuse me,
morning.
board members. Rich Clarendon, Assistant TPO Director. I hope everybody can hear me just fine. I wanted to tell you we do have a short video queued up on this, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of context. What is the strategic intermodal system? It's set out in state law as Florida's high priority network of transportation facilities important to moving people and freight, linking Florida's regions. And it includes things like the largest and most significant airports, public seaports, even a spaceport, freight rail terminals, passenger rail and intercity bus terminals, railways, walkways, and highways. The plan has existed for, I don't know how long, a couple of decades, I think. But it's updated every 5 years, and now is the time that it's being updated, and FDOT has asked for our review and comment, so this is our opportunity to weigh in. Just one other aspect to this I think that's important to recognize before we show the video, and that is that this policy plan doesn't really set forth or identify specific facilities or improvements. That's done later. This is sort of the start of the update. but there will be a 5-year plan and then subsequent phases, a second 5-year plan. It actually goes out, looks out 20 years, and there's even an unfunded needs plan. So all of that's coming to be determined. I think we can go to the video now. It's queued up, and after that, I'll have just a couple more remarks.
The 2022 SIS policy plan will focus on these 5 areas. Safety. How does the SIS, as a key element of the state's transportation system, contribute to our vision of eliminating fatalities and serious injuries on Florida's transportation system? Resilience. How can we reduce vulnerabilities of SIS infrastructure to risks including extreme weather, sea level rise, coastal and inland flooding, wildfires, and extreme heat? Technology and innovation. How do we prepare the SIS for emerging technologies, such as automated, connected, electric, and shared vehicles? Urban mobility and connectivity. How do we address the impact of congestion in both major and developing urban areas on the efficiency and reliability of the SIS for interregional travel, especially in areas where there are limited options for adding capacity to SIS corridors or limited modal alternatives to SIS highways? Rural mobility and connectivity. How can the SIS support rural revitalization and economic development and facilitate emergency evacuation and response while supporting environmental stewardship goals and community visions? For each focus area, we will present some high-level ideas for improvements. Building on the FTP and SHSP, the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, we have identified several potential safety-related policies for inclusion in the SIS policy plan. Here are some of the ideas based on input received so far. Increase the emphasis on safety as a factor in setting priorities for SIS projects. Provide more flexibility to include safety features as part of SIS capacity projects. Address engineering and operational solutions related to emphasis areas associated with higher fatality rates on the SIS. An example could be to add guardrails, rumble strips, or clear zones to address lane departures. We have identified several potential resilience-related policies for inclusion in the SIS policy plan. Here are some of the ideas based on input received so far. Consider vulnerabilities in the community and environmental screening process as part of SIS designation. For example, if there are 2 options for a connector and one is in a storm surge zone, designate the alternative. Identify resilience strategies as part of capacity needs in projects. For example, use ITS or sensors to detect hazards and share information. Expand SIS funding eligibility for adaptation or retrofit of existing infrastructure. An example would be elevation change, base layer hardening, or stormwater management to help maintain the SIS facility's safety and capacity. We also might consider expanding the definition of capacity to include increasing redundancy or providing alternatives to mitigate vulnerabilities on the system. We have identified several potential technology-related policies for inclusion in the SIS policy plan. Here are some ideas based on input we received so far. Redefine SIS capacity projects to include technology solutions for improving efficiency and reliability. In other words, define SIS projects not just as increasing the physical capacity of a corridor, but also improving efficiency and reliability. Expand SIS funding eligibility beyond what is in the current plan to provide technology infrastructure, such as electric vehicle charging stations, smart signals, locational reference markers for connected vehicles, broadband for transportation purposes, etc. Provide more flexibility for funding emerging mobility solutions, such as quick response initiatives that could be funded in the current year. We have identified several potential policies regarding urban mobility and connectivity for inclusion in the SIS policy plan. Here are some of the ideas based on input received so far. Redefine capacity projects to include mobility and reliability improvements, similar to the concept discussed under the technology section. Prioritize opportunities to improve interregional travel on the SIS. An example would be projects to create express or through lanes, create bypasses or other alternatives to bottlenecks, support truck parking or other freight accommodations, etc. This also could include providing more options for travel between Florida's largest urban areas, such as passenger rail or intrastate air service. Provide flexibility for use of SIS funds on non-SIS facilities when that is the best option to improve performance of the SIS. For example, if an SIS corridor is heavily congested and there are no viable options to add capacity to that corridor, could we use SIS funds to improve a parallel, arterial, or transit corridor if that improvement will pull local trips off the SIS and preserve capacity on the SIS for long-distance travel? We have identified several potential policies regarding rural mobility and connectivity for inclusion in the SIS policy plan. Here are some of the ideas based on input received so far. Reassess the SIS highway corridor criteria, particularly how we identify facilities capable of being improved to controlled access standards. This also could include how we consider context classification in the SIS designation/community and environmental screening process. Where there is a choice, focus SIS designation on the facilities in areas suitable for higher capacity corridors. Redefine capacity projects, in this case to include rural connectivity and through traffic improvements. This might include small projects, such as adding turning lanes or geometric improvements to improve SIS corridor safety. It also could mean expanding funding eligibility for broadband and other rural technology solutions that would improve connectivity. Strengthen rural corridor planning processes to identify programs of projects for both SIS and regional/local corridors. For example, think about how we improve a corridor like US 19, but also the connections from that corridor to rural activity centers. This could include stronger collaboration with local governments on how rural connectivity can support economic, community, and environmental goals. We value your input. Without it, the SIS cannot reflect the feedback from our partners and the public. What else do we need to do to improve these 5 focus areas? There is a public question form available if you would like to give us input. Please give your form to the FDOT representative, or you can email it or mail it to Lori Maribel, FDOT District 7 SIS Coordinator. Her information is at the bottom of the comment form. Following our targeted outreach efforts, we will draft recommendations for the plan based on input received. We will review the information with the FTP/SIS Implementation Committee and FDOT management. The draft plan will be available for public comment at the end of this year on the Systems Planning website. The final plan is anticipated to be adopted by early 2022. Thank you for allowing us to present the SIS Policy Plan Update.
So I think you can see that this is a very broad and inclusive policy framework. And actually, some of the focus areas dovetail quite nicely with things that we have in our own long-range plan that we adopted back in 2019. We have prepared a letter, a draft letter for your consideration to send to Ms. Maribel. I'll just highlight a few things from that letter that are bulleted out. We would encourage, we're very happy to see that SIS funds may be used to support safety improvements, and we would encourage the department to prepare a Vision Zero action plan for the SIS. We're also happy to see more flexibility in the use of SIS funds on parallel facilities and connecting roads and transit. We think that the growing use of transit modes is very essential for metropolitan areas such as ours, particularly because of our rapid growth and shortage of space for additional lanes. So one of the last things I would highlight in the letter is we would strongly urge that the SIS plan encourage not just inter-regional transit, that is connecting cities and regions, but also intra-regional connections between, for example, the Tampa Bay region, maybe connecting us to our adjacent cities and counties. So regionally significant transit in particular, including corridors and not just stations. So we think this would be advisable and entirely consistent with the SIS plan's stated focus on urban mobility. So that is our recommendation, is to authorize your executive director to send this letter that's been prepared. If there's questions, I'll be happy to answer them, and I think we may have a representative from DOT on the line as well.
Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you. I have some questions. I like the suggestions as to comments, that rather than or interregional, you're adding intra-regional, but for me, regionally significant, as I've stated many times, in terms of transit, the highest ridership in the entire region by a lot is between USF and downtown. And the reason I bring that up is the strategic intermodal system, as I understand it, is not just the interstates, but does it take in as well the CSX tracks, for instance? I'm curious if we have someone that can answer that.
So just to make sure I understand the question, Commissioner, you're asking, does the SIS take in the CSX corridors?
And that's
Great.
to FDOT. They're on the line here, right? I just wanted that clarification.
Yeah. Lori or somebody from the district, can you answer that question?
Hey, this is Justin Hall with FDOT District 7. So as part of the policy update that we're undergoing now, those are kind of the conversations that we're having. You know, as we update the policy and look at what's available from a transit network, you know, what can we look at? So I don't think we can necessarily answer that question right now, but I think that's kind of the point of the letter that the MPO is drafting up, is to direct DOT to look at you know, some of those other transit alternatives, like including CSX. But as far as regionally significant is concerned, that definition, you know, like the TRIP funds are a regional fund type that says that they have to be a regionally significant project. And when we discuss regionally significance, it's an impact to the transportation network that either relieves congestion from a regional route or benefits a regional facility. So prime example, like when we were looking at some of the Heights projects where they'll take traffic off of the interstate, you know, you can discuss that as that could be regionally significant because it's benefiting the regional transportation network. So I kind of two questions there that I was trying to answer, but as far as CSX rail is concerned, I think that's part of this update. You know, we're discussing that both in Tallahassee and at a district level, you know, what exactly can and cannot be included under the new policy guidelines.
Thank you. That was, and I did kind of mix two concepts there in terms of talking about regionally significant and then asking about CSX. So I guess, and I very much appreciate that clarification. I guess my question first was, as I understood, the CSX tracks around the state were already part of the SIS, but I guess that's just something under discussion at this time.
Yeah, so, and so maybe I should clarify, I was referring to the CSX conversation here locally. Some of the other transit projects throughout the state, I do believe are part of the SIS. But as far as the ones regionally, I think that was when we had the conversation with Assistant Secretary Thoburn. I know that's something that we are talking about with this update.
Can I also ask another, because we've heard, just trying to understand a little, I know we've heard many times about electric and kind of the state setting up some kind of electric charging facilities, which, I've tried to understand a little, because it would seem to me a private type of function, just like gas stations are currently something that private entities have and do to make a profit. And I just wondered, if there's anyone could speak a little to why we would intercede in a way that instead of private sector using that opportunity.
This is Rich Clarendon again. I'm not sure I can answer your question in full, Commissioner. I do know that the state has drafted an electric vehicle infrastructure master plan that I think is working its way towards adoption, if not already adopted. And I think one of the things that's emphasized there is infrastructure along some of the major interstate highways, maybe at for example, rest stops, to enable and encourage more or faster adoption of electric vehicle technology. How that's going to roll out and who's going to actually build those facilities, I think sort of remains to be seen. But I guess I would have to defer again to FDOT to answer the question in more specifics.
Yeah, and I think Rich did a pretty good job of summarizing that. As far as the EV plan, it would be a combination of public-private partnerships, as well as we're looking at adding that infrastructure to our rest areas and some of the turnpike facilities. It'd be similar to a vendor contract like we have now with the vending machines, or even in the turnpike facilities, where we've got different third parties that are providing food service. So, it'd be similar contracts to that.
And I say that as a huge supporter of electric, and see that we will have an electric future. But I'm just curious why this, and obviously, offering that at rest stops would make sense. But I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about this focus, because I would see it as something that could be a private, would be something that a private entity, and of course, even in our rest stops, we have probably less here than in other states that I've seen, where they hire out or lease to private entities to use the rest stop facilities for restaurants and that kind of thing. So I was just curious about that. And I'll just say this, and I don't know if this is a proper place or how, in terms of the feedback on this, but and maybe again, this would probably be FDOT to confirm. So at this time, we have statutory, state statute says that we allocate 50% by statute of our transportation funding to the SIS. Is that accurate?
Justin, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, I'm not really sure if I understand exactly what you're asking, and I apologize.
I was asking, as I understood, there is statutory law that requires in Florida state statutes that we allocate 50% of our transportation funding to the SIS. So we're very focused on, for instance, our interstates, because that is mostly what the SIS is in terms of where we allocate our funding. I even understood that even though that was the statutory requirement, that we, as a state, outdo the statutory requirement by something like up to 70%. I don't know. I think I've asked Ms. Alden about this before because I was trying to get clarification. And so, but I think I've had clarification at some of these meetings. I don't know who has done that in the past. And the reason I ask is because I've thought that there has been a focus on the SIS to the detriment of, in terms of requiring that investment, to the detriment of very desperate arterial roads, which the SIS feeds into, and basically huge amounts of traffic are dumped on them by our collector systems, but then the roads themselves, and I'm talking, I mean, all through this area, we have, you know, virtually every single Fowler, Fletcher, Hillsborough, Bush, MLK, you know, all being the kinds of arterial roads that I'm talking about that could, and I could go on, that could use investment. So I'm just, that's where I'm trying to understand, I just like, since we're having this discussion, it's rarely had, about the requirements for investment in the SIS and what we do even above and beyond that. Maybe Ms. Alden, if you could clarify.
Well, so as far as the funding is concerned, I mean, I think you're accurate with the percentages. And as far as this policy update is concerned, this is kind of the beginning of the policy update process. And I believe there's also a letter coming from the Hillsborough MPO. And really that's kind of the point of this process, is to take feedback from the different bodies, you know, both the MPOs and TPOs, to get feedback statewide as to what I guess you would like to see the state focus more on. I will say in the beginning of the SIS, you know, there were more projects than there was funding. When they first started the interstate, a lot of the interstate projects, most of the projects were larger than even the funding allowed for. And I think what we're seeing now is that there is this openness to conversation outside of the interstate system and some of the major highway system, because, you know, we are seeing that there's a need for work off system that still benefits regionally. And so I think that's why you're seeing this conversation. I mean, for instance, Pinellas County, you know, we've talked to them, you know, and they're pretty built out. And so a lot of the focuses now are on the arterials and you know, and the transit service, and how do you improve the transportation network when there's no more work to be done, you know, beyond a few projects on the interstates or major highways. So that is kind of where we're going with this policy update, is we do want that feedback. And that's why we're here, and that's why, you know, we had the video, and there'll be more to come. I mean, this is just the beginning of this process, but that is definitely why we're seeking the feedback.
Thank you. I just wanted to, and again, the language regionally significant, I think, is very important. And I was giving that feedback for the future, not necessarily for this letter, but I was trying to ascertain where and when and how. And I've stated that before, but we rarely talk about the SIS and how it's design funded, or you know, with regards to as its prioritization. So that's what I was trying to address.
Thank you, Commissioner Kemp. Before I call on Commissioner Overman, Mr. Fry, I see your hand up. I think it was up from before. And I see I have Commissioner Overman and Commissioner Smith in the queue. Commissioner Overman, and then Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. And thank you very much for your report. And you know, the SIS is now that we have a better understanding of how those monies can be used, and then based on our earlier conversation regarding how our short-term and long-term plans should include a comprehensive intermodal transportation system, looking at how this SIS evolves needs to include much of what we talked about in terms of the possibility of staging and planning out, or at least looking at a strategic plan for incorporating how transit fits in this area. Granted, the intermodal system does include the roads and the connections in the region, but I think it is important that we recognize that if we don't actually start planning it out in the SIS, we won't be able to move any of the transit-related discussion that we talked about this morning, whether it be expanding our road or ground-level transit system or incorporating a passenger rail system in that process. Because this, for example, the CSX lines does provide freight service as part of our intermodal service, but it also has great capacity for including moving people around safely. And since safety and Vision Zero is a key element of the SIS, I don't see a conflict there. So I would ask, while this is really updating it for early 22, but it is for several years, we may need to really explore opportunities where we can at least set on our agenda an opportunity to set a timeline for how we prioritize potentially passenger rail, even though most of that would not be possible until after 2023. But if we know it's in the plan, we can actually make sure that we make strides on it. And that's why I wanted to bring that up.
Thank you, Commissioner Overman. Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. And I wish that I had this presentation ahead of time so I could ask you, help ask for you to go back to a slide I'd like to see again, the ideas for improving rural mobility and connectivity. I think it's the second to the last graphic that was shown in the presentation. This is not the first time I've wished to have these presentations ahead of time, so that I could, and I know other commissioners and members have said the same thing, so we can have a fruitful conversation about them.
So we do only have that as a video. So our only way to pull that back up would be to run the video again. Is it possible we could hear your question or comment, and if we can't address it right now, we'll research it and bring it back to you?
Yeah. So on that slide, which I got a screen cap of, but it heavily stresses rural mobility and connectivity, and emphasizes controlled access and context classification. That jumped out at me because we are currently working on context classification kind of in a similar way after the state did context classification for long range. Thank you. Wow, great. Okay, so after the state did context classification of, on a state basis, we are now on Hillsborough County looking at context classification. And with that, I have been concerned about how we do context classification and what it's going to say about our goals for roads through rural areas. This body has already voiced our opposition, as has our county commission, to roads through rural areas that would be sprawl magnets, such as MCORs, as well as objecting to the prioritization of funding such roads over our very dire needs for urban infrastructure connecting urban areas. So with that, then I go from there to the And I think that's enough about that slide. You can take that down. But I go to the materials that we did get about the SIS, and I see that the SIS priorities will focus on 5 areas. Okay, the 4th one we highlight in our MPO TPO letter to FDOT for our feedback. We highlight one of these, the 4th focus area, which is urban mobility and connectivity. But the 5th one we don't mention, and that is rural mobility and connectivity. And yet it is listed among the priorities on a par with, so rural mobility is listed in the SIS priorities that we got from FDOT on a par with urban mobility and connectivity. And, in the rural bullet of the SIS focus point, in focusing on rural mobility and connectivity, the state says, how can the SIS support rural revitalization and economic development and facilitate emergency evacuation and response, just like the justifications for the MCORs was, while supporting environmental stewardship goals and community visions? So the goal of rural revitalization and economic development is so, I'm concerned that it can mean different things to different people. Certainly, revitalizing and developing economically in our agricultural industries would be one thing, but some people would interpret rural revitalization and economic development to mean the kind of residential housing that we've been having issues with sprawling out into our local rural area. And so when it comes to our letter, wrapping up with how we provide feedback to this this general idea that we've gotten of focusing on rural economic development and revitalization on a par with connecting urban areas, I go to our letter, and our first bullet says we support the plan's focus on resilience, technology, and innovation, urban mobility, and connectivity. And personally, my feedback would be to add a strong caveat to that, saying yes, we support the focus on urban mobility and connectivity, though we remain concerned about extending roads through rural areas in ways that would attract sprawl development. So, I'd like to hear from Ms. Alden about those thoughts for our letter, while considering making a motion maybe to amend the letter with something along those lines.
Yeah, Commissioner Smith, I agree with that. I would add, though, also perhaps to raise a concern about the environmental impacts of some of what you're raising, because that was one of the major objections that we had at the Board of County Commissioners to that particular road that you referred to, and I think that one seems to be a common theme also in this conversation. So, Ms. Alden, if you could address that, and I was thinking that a motion might be in order to incorporate some of those changes into the letter.
Sure, so these are great points. So I would suggest perhaps adding to the letter an additional bullet point that expresses concern about extending roads through rural areas in a way that attracts sprawl and creates environmental impacts, and perhaps supporting DOT's proposed context classification approach to looking at the appropriate strategies for rural mobility, and advocating that as part of that approach, that the local comprehensive plans and local governments be consulted to determine the context classification.
Commissioner Smith.
if I can follow up, I believe the context classification has been done. Maybe someone from FDO on the state basis. I was saying that the county is about to begin considering, well, we're in the process of developing context classification for our own roads in the county. But I believe the context classification was done at the state level. So, you know, the time for supporting that is past, not to mention I had some concerns about that. So maybe just keep it simple with our concerns about roads in rural areas on both those counts of attracting sprawl and environmental impacts.
And is that a motion?
Yes.
Second.
Okay, we have a second by Commissioner Kemp and Commissioner Overman. Is there any additional discussion on that motion before? We're going to vote first on the motion. I think we can do that by voice vote. All those in favor, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, I see a hand up over here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we, just for my benefit, have some definition of what we do mean by rural? And in particular, I want to make sure I understand the impact of this to Plant City. But I do think, Ms. Alden, that you made some determination or qualification in there that there would be consultation with the local comprehensive plans as it relates to this matter. So I just need a little bit better understanding of how this is specifically going to impact my community.
So that would be my suggestion. Commissioner Smith stated that there has already been an initial determination by DOT of the context classification. That is true. They have done an initial assessment. However, they've informed us that they will be updating that, particularly as they look at specific corridors. They will go back and take another look at the context classification for each road as they determine what the correct strategy is for it. And so I would still suggest that it is valuable for DOT, for us to ask that DOT consult with the local government and their comprehensive plan before they make a determination of what they think that context class is.
And absolutely, I agree with that third leg to the stool to ensure that we remain, the local governments and comprehensive plans remain in the process of that.
All right. Any other questions or comments before we're going to have a voice vote on the motion? Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Kemp.
I would just thank you, Commissioner Smith, for bringing this very important, there's huge things about the SIS, but twice in 2 different years I believe each time we voted unanimously in opposition to the MCORS program at our county commission. And the investment made in that, I called it toll roads for the wilderness. And I think it would hugely, and we've already, just in the planning of it, I think there were $200 million that were spent over the years. That's a lot of money. And this is really important, I think, that we feed back in this overarching discussion about this.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Overman and Smith, you still have your hands up. I want to make sure we're finished.
Yeah, it's not related to this motion, but I did have a
Okay, so
comment.
we're going to go ahead and vote on this motion. All those in favor of Commissioner Smith's motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And then we're going to take a roll call vote on the larger question of the letter. Excuse me, Commissioner Overman.
Thank you. Before we go there, what I don't see here is an important element associated with this, not only the SIS, but our overall transportation planning. We have done at the MPO level, as well as at the county and comprehensive level, significant research on equity and how equity plays a part in our policy decisions. The SIS is a policy decision. And so, while it's not referenced in here, I'd like to entertain either a motion or to offer a motion to ask that in the SIS process, that equity is taken into consideration, equity in terms of funding as well as planning, to specifically to address those communities that have either a significant economic disadvantage or a history of being disregarded as projects are approved through, as it pertains to transportation. You can help me clean up the language, but I think you get my point. So I'd like to put that motion forward.
Okay, I believe that was Mayor Ross. Who seconded that motion? Excuse me, it was Councilman Dingfelder seconding Commissioner Overman's motion. Is there any discussion on that motion? I don't see any. Let's go ahead and have a voice vote on that. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, now we are back to the original motion. I don't remember who made it at this point. I believe it was Commissioner Myers, but I'm not even sure. But let's go ahead and, does anyone remember who made the motion for the letter? Okay, well, we, at this time, could entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the letter.
All right.
As
Okay,
amended,
we have a
as
motion from
amended.
Commissioner Overman, seconded by Commissioner Myers. I don't see any more discussion. Let's have a roll call vote on the motion regarding the main letter.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Mayor Ross?
Yes.
Gina Evans?
Yes.
Hart Board Member Williams?
Yes.
Charles Klug?
Yes.
Bob Frey? Derek Doughty?
Yes.
Commissioner Kilton?
Yes.
Councilman Citro?
Yes.
Councilman Dingfelder?
Yes.
Board Member Vaughn?
Yes.
Motion passes 14-0 with one non-vote.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 12 minutes left. We are going to adjourn on time today. So our last item before we get to the executive director's report and any new business is the economic impact of bus system expansion. We have Dave Sobush here from the Tampa Bay Partnership for that presentation. Good morning.
He can do his presentation in 10 minutes.
Terrific.
I'll talk fast.
Well, good morning. I guess I'm on the clock. Good morning, almost afternoon. Dave Sobush, Director of Policy and Research at the Tampa Bay Partnership. I know that several members of the MPO, TPO that serve on the Hart Board have seen some of this, so I will be brief and try to leave some time for questions. If you could go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit of table setting for this study is that it builds upon a real seminal piece of research done in 2011 by the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program, Missed Opportunity, Transit and Jobs in Metropolitan America. And while the findings of that report are not completely transferable to the methodology we used, at the time it found that Tampa Bay ranked 93rd out of 100 largest metros in terms of people being able to access jobs within a 90-minute transit commute. The work that we're doing here and that I'll be presenting is unique in that it's looking at how different levels of investment in the transit system will affect job access change, which is the ability of somebody through walking to a bus stop or transit stop and getting on a transit vehicle and then arriving at another transit station and walking to their place of employment, how many people can do that within a 60-minute job commute, as is the primary unit of analysis. And a key part of this is that all the information that we modeled was taken from the individual agencies. It was taken from HART, TBarta, PSTA, PCPT, which is recently rebranded. It's a popular thing. And you know, those plans were what was modeled by the University of Minnesota Accessibility Observatory. And as we go through these scenarios, you know, just be aware that they are additive. So we are layering layers of investment on top of each other. Next slide, please. And so the scenarios we'll be looking at, there are 4 of them. And we start with scenario A, which is taking the 10-year needs projects out of the transit agency transit development plans. Scenario B adds a few county-based premium transit services, the Sunrunner in St. Petersburg, the Tampa streetcar extension modernization, the Florida Avenue BRT. Scenario C adds a regional premium transit option, the regional rapid transit. And then finally, scenario D, which is a very visionary scenario. It adds a bunch of premium transit services, rail on the CSX lines, BRT, and express bus. It comes from the TBarta Envision 2030 Regional Transit Development Plan and their vision element. Next slide, please. So starting off, we're going to run through these 4 scenarios, and you'll see a series of maps. The darker the green color shows the greater percentage change of job access for workers that reside in those areas. And that's important to note that percentage change may be representing fewer total jobs that are newly accessible under each of these scenarios. So just because you see West Tampa and East Tampa not as dark green as the others, rest assured that they are gaining access to many, many more multiples of raw numbers of jobs. But because even given our relatively scarce transit resources, some of these communities are, in fact, the best served by transit, and appropriately so because they are the most transit dependent. So scenario A starts with the local bus, which is those 10-year needs elements of the TDPs of the transit agencies. And we see that the typical resident in the 4-county MSA, so that's Hernando, Pasco, Hillsborough, Pinellas, gains access to 26,000 additional jobs, which is almost a third more jobs accessible within that 60-minute transit commute than previous. And they move from being able to access, again, the typical resident, 7.2% of jobs in the market to 9.2%. And we note here the total number of jobs. So it's a significant number. And I present the breakout for this group, for both the City of Tampa municipal limits as well as Hillsborough County. And you see that while the percentage changes are lower in Tampa than the typical MSA, the total number of jobs accessible is larger. And again, that gets back to that sort of, the raw number versus the percentage change. Next slide, please. So in this scenario, we're adding in the local premium. And again, that's the Sunrunner from downtown St. Pete to the beach, the Tampa streetcar modernization extension, and the Florida Avenue BRT. And we see in this scenario, layered on top of the local bus, we are getting a minor delta in terms of job access. We were at 26,000 and we go to 27,000, and just about a 0.2% increase in job access, 9.3% of all jobs accessible. And again, the Tampa and Hillsborough numbers don't change a tremendous amount. And, we'll get into some of this at the end, but just know that job access is one way to measure transit efficiency, and that there may be other goals that premium transit serves, whether that's workforce housing, transit-oriented development, et cetera. Next slide, please. So scenario C adds in the regional rapid transit, the 41-mile route from Wesley Chapel down into downtown St. Petersburg using the I-275 corridor. And while it is a small change, we note that it is roughly a 3x change, adding in the regional rapid transit on top of scenario B than we saw going from scenario A to scenario B. So the regional rapid transit really is showing a strong driver of job access compared to those 3 county-based premium transit projects. Next slide, please. And then finally, scenario D, Envision 2030, and the projects that are listed in here are it's regular ferry service. It is passenger transit on the CSX tracks, multiple BRT routes. We see a big jump, and you should for what might be $6 billion or more worth of projects in the Envision 2030 plan. And we see that the typical MSA resident is getting access to an additional 52,000 jobs, so roughly double what we had just by adding in the local bus. And that is a close to 60% job access increase. We are now, the typical resident is accessible to 11.3% of all jobs in the metro. And we note here, again, this gets back to that percentage change versus raw change. There's 116,000 workers in the metro that are now able to access more than 150,000 jobs than they were compared to the baseline, so a significant increase. And we see again in both Tampa and Hillsborough County, the percentage increase in Tampa, which has relatively robust transit service compared to the metro, 101.6 additional jobs per resident. And we'll move into the next slide if we can. So just a couple, examples of how we used an equity lens looking at this at the partnership. In the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, the state, I believe, erroneously released a lot of information about folks filing reemployment assistance or unemployment insurance claims, including their zip code and their wage levels and their industry they worked in. And what you see on the map there, these are the zip codes that had a 5% or more of the workforce filed as of April 4th. So, just a few weeks into the pandemic, an initial claim for reemployment assistance. And we see that, these communities of concern, under the scenario D, see a larger increase in jobs, 76,000, if you recall, it was 56,000. And see some, additional positive increases in the percentage and of increase in the share of all jobs accessible within a 60-minute transit commute. Next slide, please. And then another community concern are the transit-dependent, neighborhoods with high poverty and few vehicles. The long story short here is that these investments under scenario D would provide significant benefits to these communities of concern. We'll go into the next slide, which shows the scenarios in comparison. I'll leave that for you to review, and we'll skip past the charts, which I believe are the next two slides, because I want to get to the conclusions. Okay, we'll stay here. So in the competitiveness report, which we do at the partnership with Community Foundation of Tampa Bay and United Way Suncoast, we take a look at where Tampa Bay ranks in terms of transit supply and transit demand. So that's vehicle revenue, miles, and then passenger trips. We rank 20th out of 20 every year. And but in terms of job accessibility, we actually perform rather well, better than last in terms of job access with our transit system, which means our agencies are doing a good job with their limited resources in getting people, to places of employment. And, the key thing here is that if we made that investment in the scenario D, that Envision 2030, we would get a big jump, but we'd still be nowhere near, some of these top performing metros in terms of job access. And that's a function of transit availability and also land use. So it just kind of shows how far we have to go here in Tampa Bay. Next slide, please. And then finally, I mentioned this earlier, job access is an additional goal in analysis tool for transit planning. So whether or not something is cost effective, what's the ridership going to be, how will it engender transit-oriented development, those are all, goals and analysis tools. Job access should be also. The big takeaway is that it's the local bus service along arterial roads provides that greatest impact for the typical Tampa Bay worker compared to all other transit investment scenarios that we modeled. And this gets back to, something I heard on a benchmarking trip. We were looking at the light rail line in Charlotte, and the transit director there said, you're looking at our light rail line, that's the show horse, but that bus over there and the hundreds other just like it, those are the workhorse, and that's really what gets people around. And we went through the other items, I believe, to some degree of success when I was talking about them on the slides, and you've got this for your reference. There's no time left for questions, but I'd gladly stick around and answer any if it's the pleasure of the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, and it is exactly 12 o'clock. Are there any board members, I ask you to be cognizant of the time, are there any board members with any questions or comments at this moment? Commissioner Kemp.
I'll just be fast,
Okay.
knowing the time. I just want to say that the focus of every single bus system or transit system in America, bar two, New York and Washington, D.C., is the bus. The bus is the workhorse of the systems, and the buses, it can be as accommodating and wonderful as any, or close to any rail, as permanent and can be more frequent in terms of cost. But that being said, I'd just like to say, I know, thanks for highlighting the local bus. You do use a metric of an hour from a place. The typical standard metric that I've seen used all over is 45 minutes, that people are rarely willing to go for an hour. And I'd just like to say that would change that up a lot.
Thank you, Commissioner Kemp. And thank you for that presentation. That backup is available in everyone's packet, so you can delve into that on your own. If you have any questions, Mr. Sobush has said that he will be available for them. Ms. Alden, do you have anything to add, and would you like to make a few comments before we close the meeting?
Thank you so much. Great discussion today. And the job access expansion that Mr. Sobush presented is consistent with the bus system expansion that was contemplated in the long-range transportation plan that would be supported with the transportation sales surtax, assuming that there's a certain percent set aside for bus system expansion. So that gives you an indication of those job access benefits that could be created. I obviously can't top Secretary Gwynn's announcement this morning about new funding in our West Shore interchange area in particular. But we are monitoring the federal legislation, and we're excited about where that's going. So I hope to be back to you next month with more details about that. But it does look like it is going to provide some more funding for our priority projects, as well as some new grant opportunities. This Friday, the TMA Leadership Group is meeting Friday morning, 9:30 a.m. at the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority office. The agenda and information on how to participate remotely are all on our new beautiful regional website for the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance. There is an announcement about the launch of that website in your addendum, but for members of the public, that is suncoasttpa.org, Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance.org, where you can get information about all of our regional meetings, regional priorities, and the upcoming Gulf Coast Safe Streets Summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And our next meeting will be October 13th, right here. We'll start off with the Policy Committee at 8:30 and then have our MPO board meeting from 10 o'clock to noon. And with that, we are adjourned.